Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. My name is Carey Nieuwhof, and my goal is to help you lead like never before. So what I do every week is I sit down with world-class leaders and church leaders, business leaders, and I talk to them about what made them who they are and try to have the conversation with them that you would have if you got to sit down for lunch with them or have dinner with them or really got to spend some time with them. So we go into the backstory and we explore what made them who they are and some of the principles they've learned along the way. So if you enjoy this episode, I would love for you to like it, to subscribe, and also to share it with your friends. And in the meantime, here's today's episode. Sam, welcome back. Man, it was a whole other world last time we were together on this show, was it not?
Man, I am I get honored every time you have me here. It was another world. We are living in a new reality right now. And I am just all around the world, really. I mean, who thought that something could happen that would stop the entire world?
I know. I'm thinking back. I mean, it's August now when this is airing. And, if somebody said, hey, all the borders will be shut down, there'll be this virus, the global economy will collapse, people will be scared to go out, you'll be lining up for food. It's like you saw, like I'm older than you are. I remember the bread lines from like the communist Eastern Bloc, and people would line up for food, right? And I'm like, yeah, that'll never happen here. People are wearing masks, and it's like, whoa, like that's insane. But here we are, and an exciting moment in some ways, and a devastating moment in some ways. So we're going to go all over the place. You got a brand new book out today too, correct?
I am just overwhelmed that this book is out. The amount of love that I have received from this. This has been a 3-year journey. It's really been a 5 to 6 year journey when the whole thing happened with Steve on the Steve Harvey show.
I was going to say, what year was that with Steve Harvey?
Man, I can't give you the exact date, but I know it was 6 years ago. Because I'm 31 now, and I was on it when I was 25. So maybe, about 6 years. And man, it's just crazy to think that we would be here today and that a book would happen. And you're an author, but this is my first major publishing release.
Yeah. This is
it's like Christmas.
And tell us, for those who don't know the story, I haven't seen the clip. And I got to say, we've been friends for years, for almost 5 or 6 years. So that must have happened after you and I met, or before you and I met. And I just hadn't watched the clip. And then I watched the clip recently getting ready to interview you again. And I bawled like a baby, just like I was gone. So explain to everyone the journey that led you up to the Steve Harvey show.
Man, I'm going to tell the story here. I never tell it because I'm always like, oh, I got to save it for churches. Right? But I'm telling, but I'm going to say it here, especially because this is the day that it's out and I just love you. And I think, I was 2 months when I got adopted. Me and my twin sister, we got adopted together. And we got adopted and rescued out of poverty. Our mother was 21 when she had us. And she had 3 kids already. So that's 5 kids, age 21, and welfare, dad addicted to crack and all types of substances. And so he left the picture. She didn't have enough money to take care of the 3. So she gives me and my twin sister up, for adoption. And we do get adopted. But the story that led up to our adoption is even wilder because my father was in the middle of his 2nd divorce, and my father being my adoptive father. And he went to the laundromat on a Sunday to just wash his clothes. And he usually went on a Saturday, but this day he went on a Sunday. And my mother, my adoptive mother, was in there, and she was in the middle of her first divorce, married to a Black Panther. And she was there.
The Black Panther, right? So, the movement,
from the Black Panther Party, and he was extremely aggressive. Not all the Black Panthers were aggressive, but a lot of them were, and he was, and so he had hit her in the head with the hammer the night before. And honestly, man, just between us and all the listeners,
no one's listening. It's okay. It's just you and me, Sam.
Right? She was gonna go kill him. that day,
Her former husband.
She
She was going to go and
laundry.
murder her soon-to-be divorced husband.
Yeah, because she said, by any means necessary, I have to get out of this situation. And I get it. I mean, it was extreme abuse and control and all of that. And so she meets my dad that day, doesn't go and kill her ex-husband, and they start dating. They both go through their divorces. They give their life to Christ for the first time. And they say, this is our opportunity to do it right. They get married. They find out my mother can't have kids. So they come down to Augusta, Georgia, where we had just been given up for adoption 2 months prior. And
so you're in the system, right? At that point.
I'm in the system.
Yep.
I'm in the system as an infant, and everything about our life said that it was going to be over. They came to adopt us. The adoption lady said, you don't want to adopt them. They're probably going to be mentally challenged because of where they come from.
Because of the drug addiction and everything, or?
Yeah, drugs. They said that they traced some of my mother's steps back to prostitution houses. And so they said, this is, if you want to do it right, you guys are Christians. This is not going to be it. They're probably not going to be much. And so my parents adopt us anyway. And they said they believe that God told them, no, it's something special about them. Long story short, my sister gets all A's from kindergarten up to 12th grade and goes full scholarship to Georgia Tech and Spelman, becomes an industrial engineer. And I turn into me, and all the stuff that, God's just been afforded me to do, from ministry to radio to television, all these other things.
Oh, dude, it's been just such a joy to watch. And we've told the story of how we met once or twice on this show before, but it was before anyone knew who Sam Collier was. But just to be there, cheering you on and watching what God's doing in your life and seeing you really emerge as a leadership voice that everybody respects has been exceptional.
Carey, don't make me cry. It's too soon in the show, man.
So pick up the story. So your mom and dad, new chapter, they take the kids that nobody was supposed to take because it's too challenging and these kids aren't going to turn out anyway.
Yeah, and Black family. So nobody ever knew we were adopted because we all looked alike.
Right. So your parents are Black, you're Black. Yeah.
Yeah. And anyway, man, God moved in our story. Grew up middle class, we weren't super rich, but we had everything that we needed. Didn't have everything we wanted, but had everything that we needed. Really balanced childhood, rooted in Black Christianity, and I say Black Christianity just in terms of Black theology, Black church, all that. T.D. Jakes was playing in the house every Sunday morning, and Joyce Myers would show up every now and then, but for the most part, it was T.D. Jakes. And so, man, we were living our life. And then right around 24, my dad erupts during NFL football as we're watching it as the immediate family together, like we do every Sunday. He erupts and he says, "It's time." And we're like, "It's time? What do you?" He said, "It's time to go find your parents." I mean, it was
just in the middle of an NFL game,
right? And I said, "What?" He said, "And Steve Harvey is going to help you do it. God told me." So let's pause for a second. So my dad has, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
A barbershop down on Auburn Avenue, right across the street from the Martin Luther King Jr. Center.
I wanted to ask you about that with your story. So is that close to Ebenezer Baptist Church, like the whole deal, that neighborhood?
My dad's barbershop was across the street from Ebenezer.
Okay.
Is across the street from
I've been there. I know that neighborhood. Yeah.
Yeah. Right? Auburn Avenue, the home of civil rights, where Martin Luther King grew up. Where he pastored, where he started the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was his only organization. The King Center is right there too. The above ground tombs of MLK and Coretta sit, right there. And so he had a barbershop there. And every day, when you're in the barbershop, you do the same thing. You cut hair, you eat, you take some naps, you watch TV. So he would watch Steve Harvey every day when Steve Harvey took Oprah's slot on NBC, I believe. And so he said while he was watching Steve one day, God told him that Steve Harvey was going to help us find our biological family.
And he doesn't know Steve.
So
it's like saying Oprah's going to help, right? Like he's not
it was
buddies with
ridiculous.
Steve.
It was so ridiculous when he said it. I got up and walked out of the room. I left the house. I said, I'm out.
Dad's lost it.
It was like, he's lost his mind. He was known for doing some crazy stuff, you know what I'm saying? So I said, I'm out of here. You've lost your mind. And he convinces my sister to write into the show 2 weeks later. And I'm asking her, why did you do it? And she says, well, he just kept yelling. So my dad, he's from the country. So he, you know, when he talks normally, it's a yell. You know what I'm saying? To him, it's normal. To, you know, everybody else is like, why are you talking so loud? You know, so it really more so sounded like this. It's time to go find your parents. And the Steve Harvey is going to help you find them. I said, what? And so anyway, a year goes by, nothing happens. And one day my phone rings. It's a Monday. It's 3 p.m. It's my sister. I answer the phone. I said, hello. She says, hey, the Steve Harvey show just called me. They're going to call you back. And hung up the phone. Wow. She's mad. She's mad. And so a minute goes by, my phone rings, and I answer, hello. Hey, this is Dorothy from the Steve Harvey show. This is my first week on the job. She just had left Jerry Springer. And I was like, what?
You just left Jerry Springer. Oh, that's always a good setup.
I mean, it was ridiculous. And she said, you know, out of 100 stories that they put on my desk today, yours was the top story. We think we can help you find your biological family. Do you want to do it? I said, let me call you back. I called my sister. My sister said she did not want to do it, but I feel like we need to do it. I called her back. Long story short, they fly me, my sister, my adoptive parents up to Chicago where they were taping. When we got there, they said, we did not find anybody. We're so sorry. We hired a private detective, but we want to bring you on the show to make a plea that maybe your biological family would show up. They bring us on the show. Steve goes through it. He says they're going to make a plea. They go to a break. They come back after the break. And Steve says, hey, I know we said we didn't find your birth mother, but that's not true. Your birth mother is here. Eleanor, come on out. And on national television, we meet a biological mother and our 3 siblings that we did not know we had for the first time.
Can I slow you down? Because when I watched the clip, your sister got up right away. Yeah. And you just sat there with your head down in between your knees for 60, 90 seconds. What were you thinking? What were you feeling?
Carey, though. I said I was going to be, I said I wasn't.
I know. I'm holding it together too, Sam. Sort of. No, I'm not.
It was so many emotions. I didn't know which one to choose. And I didn't know if I should have been mad at Steve.
Because he lied to you. Yeah.
Lying. I didn't know if I should be upset with my mother, my biological mother, for giving us up. I didn't know if I should be grateful for the fact that God intervened and turned our mess into a miracle. And then I was on national television. And then I was thinking, I think everybody wants me to cry. And I'm trying to, but I'm just in shock. It was just so.
Yeah.
And so I just put my head down because I said, I need to figure out what's going on. And as my head is down and I'm deciphering through all of these emotions, God says to me audibly, and audibly is different depending on who you're talking to. For me, It's not like a speaker comes out of the wall.
You heard a voice.
Yeah, I heard a voice, and he said to me, you're on national television, snap out of it.
That's a great voice.
And I said, okay. And he says, we can deal with these emotions later, but right now you need to hug your mother. And you need to embrace her because this is hard for her too. And so I snap out of it. I get up and I embrace her. And I'm like, and then we sit down and I just ask her if she's okay, and it's just this moment but it was wild.
Yeah. And then your siblings come out, who you kind of knew existed. Did you know that you had siblings before?
We never knew. Here's what our parents told us. because people always ask me, when did you know that you were adopted? And from day one, since I can remember, my parents told us, you guys are adopted. You guys are adopted. You guys are adopted.
So they never pretended you weren't or anything.
Never pretended. They made it a cool thing. It was like, hey, we adopted you. And we were like 1, 2 years old. And so we're like, what's that? And they're like, well, your mother that had you couldn't take care of you, we don't think. So we're here to take care of you. And so it was just this cool thing. And we were like, yay. Like it was like.
And you feed me and you love me and you read me stories and it's great. Yeah.
Right. And so we started going to like preschool and telling everybody we were adopted. We were like, hey, we're adopted. We're adopted. And all the other kids that were adopted were like, we are too. And then all the other kids that weren't adopted started going home and telling their parents, can we be adopted? And so it was just, it was always kind of, just this cool thing. And so as far as I can remember, they would tell us, they said, we think you have brothers and sisters, but we don't know. Because I think it was a closed adoption.
Sure.
And so they said, we think you do, but we don't know. We think your mother was poor, but we don't know. But we're here now. And we love you. And we ended up. So we didn't know. So when he says, come on out and your siblings are here, I mean, it was just like, for the first time in our lives, we saw people we looked like. And I don't, this is, people are listening so they can't see the pictures, but I mean, if you see my brother, he looks exactly like me. I mean, my sisters are like identical. It's scary. Wow. I have a weird laugh. My laugh is kind of.
Yeah. I know the Sam Collier laugh. Yeah.
Right. And I enjoy it. We went out to eat that night and someone made a joke. Everyone laughed. We all had the same laugh.
Get out. So some of that's what, genetic or who knows? Who knows what that is? I mean, DNA. Yeah.
So.
Wow. And okay, let me ask you this, because everything shapes us as a leader. How do you think at this point in your life that shaped you into who you are? The whole story, being adopted, not knowing your birth mother until relatively recently, not knowing your siblings until recently, being born into that kind of poverty and addiction, and then being pulled out of it into adoption and a different kind of upbringing. I mean, I can't tell you, Sam. I mean, some of our leaders listening have gone back to episode 1, and the number of times, and this is not intentional, but we've had so many different guests who have said, I had a really tough childhood and I kind of rose above the odds. And, here I am running this in business, or here I am in ministry, or whatever that happens to be. I want to know how it shaped you.
Yeah. I mean, it did not shape me like many adoption stories shape people. Which is something that I have discovered over the years as I've navigated telling this story and doing adoption conferences and talking to people and even doing church services of telling this story. And then you hear these stories. A large part of this, I think, was my dad, who always told me, and this is my adopted dad, who always told me that it's not about the cards you've been dealt, it's about how you play your hand. And so he never let us focus on the past. It was like, okay, cool. You can't, and frankly, we didn't really know where we came from either, which may have been a blessing, maybe in disguise. But we knew that maybe it was poverty. I mean, you can process it as abandonment, or what does that mean about me? But my dad always said that doesn't matter. What matters is that you're in a loving family, and that you have all the potential in the world to be anything that God wants you to be. And so the question is, what are you going to do now with what God has given you? And so I think for me, how it shaped me is it forced me, and I learned this more and more over the years, to take advantage of the opportunity that was in front of me and to not become a victim to my circumstances, but to write my own story with obviously with the grace of God. I think the other thing that is done for me now, being 31 as a leader, leading in all these different places. I'm young, I'm usually the youngest most of the time in a lot of these rooms, is it's caused me to ask the question, what is influence really about? And what is the responsibility of influence? Because when I think about my parents, they didn't have to adopt us. My dad, this is his third marriage. Like my dad was 53 when he adopted us. So he's 83 now. My mother is in her 70s. She has all time. They're just older. So for them that late in their life to leverage their money, their resources, their time, their care to steward two twins for 18 years, it makes it actually, why does God give us influence and what are we really supposed to do with it? How are we to be good stewards over the life that we have now lived, which even takes us, we're going to talk maybe about race in a second, but it's the whole race conversation and all that. It's like, to my white leader friends and all that, it's, God's given you so much, not all, but there are many. What is why? What is God? Why did he give it to you? And what is the cost of that? Being even in America makes me ask that question all the time. Why was I born in America, not in a third world country, with poverty? And, what is the price of influence? What is the cost of it? What is the responsibility of it? And how do I now leverage what God has given me to help someone that doesn't have it or to make the world a better place? So I think that's been the season I'm in now, Carey, is how do I, lack of a better phrase, pay God back for what he gave me? And why did he give it to me? And I know it wasn't just because he liked me more than other people.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm at.
Okay, just to tie a bow on that a little bit, not that, you can reduce a story to 15, 20 minutes, but the book tells that story and sort of your story. What would your hope be for readers who read the book? And then I want to talk about this moment culturally where we are for African Americans with the change that seems to be underway this summer and dissect that with you. But tell me a little bit about the book, and it tells your story, and what's your hope for readers as they access it?
Yeah, I think the book, it opens with the Steve Harvey moment. So we kind of unpack it. We give details that I've not been able to share today because it's just so much. I mean, you jump into this, jump into this. And then we spend maybe about a fourth of the book talking about what it means to grow up Black in America and how that shaped me. And we talk about Auburn, we talk about fatherlessness, home, all these other things, and relate it back to adoption of why, my father wasn't there and what that actually means. And we kind of just tell the story of how I went from a mess to a miracle. And my hope is that as people kind of read that journey, they are encouraged that whatever mess they are in, and, during this time, we all are in a mess, right? We got COVID-19 happening. We've got, some of the greatest racial tension since the 60s in America right now. We're all in a mess. We're trying to figure out how to move forward. And my hope is that people would see that God can take a mess and turn it into a miracle if you let him. And there are certain moments, and every small decision helps to create a pathway to that miracle. And then we spend some time in there unpacking how to actually access the greater story that God, basically the purpose-driven life. There's a purpose-driven life moment in there where we kind of give a formula to purpose, because all of that was just involved in my story into taking me from that situation to where it was now. Because not everybody that gets adopted and is raised in a middle-class family turns into my sister. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
How do you, what are the extra keys that you need to actually excel in this life and to excel in the kingdom under the principles of Christ? And so I just hope that people are encouraged that no matter what they're going through and no matter what their circumstances are, they don't have to be a victim of that, but that with God, they can overcome.
So I want to talk about growing up Black in America. So I'm Canadian, definitely Caucasian. We've been friends for years, and you and I have talked a fair bit in the midst of, and we're obviously recording this before August 4th, but with the death of George Floyd and the tension that we have and the thirst for racial reconciliation, I've really benefited from your voice. And part of it, honestly, Sam, transparently, is I think it's hard for those of us who didn't grow up in that circumstance to imagine what it's like. So I would love for you to take me through that lens as it shaped your life. And remember, you're only 31. I mean, so you were born, what year were you born?
1988.
1988. So this is like recent history. This is not like, oh yeah, you were around in the 50s. No, 1988. So we're talking like your childhood was the late 90s, early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
So
100%.
Walk us through what it was like.
Wow. Well, I think I had the benefit of growing up in Atlanta. And Atlanta, Georgia, depending on where you are around the world, in the States is, revered as like Black Hollywood. So it is the birthplace of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It is the birthplace of civil rights movement here. We had so much Black excellence come out of this city that when I was growing up, and I'm going to talk about the oppression, I was aware of the oppression. But I saw so many faces of Black leaders that overcame in spite of the oppression, that I never saw the oppression as a crutch or as a reason that I could not succeed. But at the same time, I was educated heavily on what you need to do to overcome the oppression.
And can I just add a little bit of context? If you were born in 1988, in 1987, I just rewatched a clip of that recently. There was the Oprah show in North Fulton County, which is almost Atlanta, which was the last white county in the South. And basically African Americans were not allowed to live there right up until the 80s. And I mean, that clip's on YouTube. We'll link to it in the show notes. But so it's not like there wasn't racism in Atlanta.
100%.
Yeah. So just to frame it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the South. I mean, when you think of the United States, it's the South. I mean, I'm doing this episode right now in California. Me and you are talking because we're doing traveling by the grace of God during COVID-19.
Yeah.
And California is different than Atlanta. It doesn't have the history. New York is different than the South. The South, when we talk about the Civil War, right? I mean, with the Confederate States and the Union, all these other things, it's like, this is where the Confederacy lived. This is where it was birthed. So there are even places now in Georgia where you can drive and Confederate flags fly at, from houses. They fly at certain capitals. I mean, so, and we're talking about, the Confederate flag, and I'm not going to get into that right now, but a large part of it, represents oppression. The Confederate Army was fighting to keep us in slavery. You know what I'm saying? So, among other things, but that was one of the main tenets.
But you grew up and saw Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You saw others. Tyler Perry has a studio there, et cetera, et cetera. Talk about Black Hollywood. But I mean, there's lots and lots of role models for you far beyond that list growing up. So I didn't want to interrupt you, but I did want to frame the context for people. I spent a lot of time in Atlanta, so I know a little bit about the context, not nearly as much as you. So, okay, pick up the narrative.
No. You're 100% right about that. And I would say, because we had all of these freedom fighters that we were aware of, and it was taught, they showed us how to overcome. Now, that's not to say that there was nothing to overcome, because I think a lot of people hear that and they go, oh, well, Black people can just, MLK did it and Harriet Tubman did it and all these, like.
And I would say, honestly, to be totally transparent, and I love how free we can be, I probably had that like, oh, well, you just overcome that attitude, but it's not that simple, is it?
No, I think it's a sad reality. But the silver lining in the cloud is that you do have a pathway out of it, but it is an unfortunate pathway that you should not have to have. You know what I'm saying?
Very well said. Very well said.
And so the pathway goes a little something like this. You have to work twice as harder than a white person to succeed. I can't tell you the amount of times I heard that. Hey, if
And that
you
was from what?
expect,
Your parents, teachers,
that was
whatever?
from my parents, that was from my coaches, that was from my uncles, that was from my mentors, that was from Black America. Everyone said it. I mean, it was I mean, every time we had a motivational speaker, because I grew up in the I grew up in the Black context, all Black
Right.
neighborhood, all Black school, all Black so on and so forth. We heard that from everyone, and it was being Black in America means that you don't have the luxury of underachieving. You have to overachieve to even be normal, to succeed. You have to overachieve. And so they taught us that. And they would, I mean, even as explicit as, okay, if the white person is rehearsing their line, let's just say it's theater.
Sure.
The white person is rehearsing their lines, 2 times, you need to rehearse it 5.
Wow.
You need to know it better because you'll be tested harder. The expectations will be greater and the obstacles will be heavier and will be taller. So
Wow.
that's just what And so because of Martin Luther King Jr. and because of all the other people that did that, you had the confidence to know, well, if I do that, I can succeed. I can succeed. I know racism is still alive. I know prejudice is still alive. I know systemic oppression is still alive, but I can overcome. I just have to work harder. And so that's what you do. You work extremely hard. And another lesson, right, that you learn growing up Black is with law enforcement. It's, hey, when you get pulled over, do not make a move, right? Like it could go south very quick. And the moment you as a Black man get thrown into the justice system, your life's over. I mean, that's what they told us.
Wow. Is that, can I just ask, and I've been trying to listen along with many, many other non-Black leaders to friends, and between podcasts, personal conversations, and other conversations I've had with African Americans, is that almost a universal script where you are told, like I've heard everyone from Dr. Tony Evans to George Raveling to, I think, Albert Tate, I don't want to put words in Albert's mouth, to, you say, there's almost a script. Huh? You'll put it in Albert's mouth. Okay.
I'll put it in his mouth. Yeah. I definitely America. I can't speak for other nations.
No, but just in America, it's similar. Like, so walk through the protocol.
Yeah.
How are you taught to think about being pulled over for, speeding or, defective brake light or something like that?
Yeah, I'm going to make it plain. Be as nice as possible, Sam. That's the plainest. Be the nicest. It doesn't matter what they say to you. They could curse you out, call you the N-word, spit in your face. Do not react, because that is the only system that if they have the power, if they say that it was assault, if they say you were talking back, if they say you were out of line, if they say they were threatened, you get thrown into the system off of the word of a white cop. And so you be as nice as you can be, and you take whatever abuse you have to take. Now, obviously, if you're getting beat up and if you're getting, killed, that's a different story. But even at that, it's like you do not do anything to set a cop off, because it's it could be the beginning of the end for you. And so it looks like, so whenever we got pulled over, we were nervous. We were afraid. We were like, you breathing hard. I remember if I was ever talking on the phone, right, when cell phones came out and
gotta hang up.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm getting pulled over. Let me call you back. Like, I gotta call you. And you did everything you could. It's like, 10 and 2, keep your hands up. I had a friend of mine that told me recently, he was with some friends in a car. We grew the same age, and he got pulled over, and a police walked up, and the first thing he said was, "So where's the weed?"
Wow.
Where's the weed? And he was like, he went off on him because his dad was a cop at the time, Black guy. His dad had to tell him, like, don't ever do that. But he was like, what are you talking like? We just riding around. We're doing, what makes you think we have weed in the, I mean, just so, anyway, it is an experience, with law enforcement. It is unfortunate because when you compare it to what your white friends hear, it's completely different.
Well, I would say too, because you and I've talked about this, but sure, anybody who gets pulled over, and I don't get pulled over a lot, but when I have, yeah, your heart races, you hang up the phone, you're extra polite. But I think in a previous conversation you and I had, it never occurred to me, it just never occurred to me that this could be the beginning of the end. That it just never occurred to me that, if I'm speeding, yes, please, the only question in my mind is he going to let me off? Is he going to drop it? You were doing, 80 in a 60 zone, but I'm going to drop it to 70 to give you a break. Or is it he's just going to give me the regular ticket? It just never occurred to me that I would be arrested for that or that he was going to look for something else. It never did. And listen, I know a lot of good cops. You know a lot of good cops. This is not cop bashing.
There are amazing cops out there. I think I want to take a moment and honor them and thank them because they're black cops, they're white cops. I mean, the greatest thing about where we are right now in America as it pertains to George Floyd and just I coined it the liberation of black and brown people around the world. The movement that we're in right now is that you get white cops and black cops speaking up.
Yeah.
On behalf of this. And so I think when unity, that's why it feels different this time, because there's a sense of unity. I've never been more hopeful than I've ever been. This country and us moving forward in the last 40 years than right now, because there is a sense of unity and everyone saying, hey, there's a problem with there are a lot of bad apples in the bunch. I won't get into the argument around there are certain people that believe, it was the police system was built this way and it needs to just be torn down all the way. And it was built this way. So let me go ahead and give credence, right? We know the origin of policing in America was slavery.
Yeah, so I did not know that until you told me that.
Yeah. I mean,
you want to give the thumbnail of that just to not leave people dangling on that? How did that happen?
For sure. So the first officers that ever existed were birthed out of slavery. And they were created to keep slaves in check. So if slaves ran away, they would go get them. If slaves were doing anything bad, they would beat them. They would, sometimes hang them, kill them. They were called slave catchers. And so out of that system, as the years matriculated and as life matriculated, as America grew, those slave catchers became the police department.
I did not know that.
Yeah, a lot of the ethos that is within the law enforcement system and a lot of the policies came out of a system of segregation and of oppression and of slavery. And there were moments when we got integrated, right? When with the civil rights movement, where black cops were being brought into the force and could not change in the same room as a white cop.
Wow.
And so we're talking about years of oppression, years of racism, years of separation. And now almost, 60 years later, we're kind of surprised that we're having an issue with black and brown people in law enforcement. I mean, it's it was birthed out of this place. There is a sense of you need to rethink this whole thing, reevaluate, uproot, replant, to start over.
So you were vocal early on. I tried to, as best I could, lend some support to African-American friends in the cause of racial reconciliation, from my perch in Canada. Yeah. But one of the experiences a lot of leaders had, and we're recording this weeks in advance of air, so I don't know what's going to be true August 4th. It's just that kind of year. You know what that's like, Sam.
Sure.
But a lot of leaders, white and black, and brown, were getting beat up like crazy for saying anything on social media, you included. Can you walk us through the dynamics of that a little bit? Because I think there's a lot of leaders who are afraid to post. And not to date this interview too much, but there's a very well-known preacher who's being dragged. He said something that probably he shouldn't have said. And, he's a good guy. And, he's like, man, people are just getting pilloried. And I imagine there's a lot of leaders who could perhaps be excited about some of the change that's coming and committed deeply to racial justice and reconciliation, but who are like, Sam, listen, man, I'm going to support you privately, but if I say anything publicly, I'm going to get creamed on social media. What would you say to them? Wow.
I think I'll I'll talk about that, and then I'll talk about how I was getting slaughtered.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, because you were getting, I mean, we went back and forth. You were getting slaughtered too. It's not just
yeah,
like,
all sides. I would say to my white leader friends, especially, that we need your voice more than ever.
Hmm.
And so choosing to say nothing is not an option. And when I say it's not an option, I'm not demanding you. I'm saying it doesn't help us. It hurts. We need you. When we talk about kind of the price of influence and the price, why does God give it to us? I think there's a section of people all around the world, of Black and brown people all around the world, screaming for help.
Hmm.
And one of the biggest ways you can help is by speaking up. Now, I do think when you speak up, you have to be humble. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about right now, Carey, is helping my white brothers and sisters that are speaking up, that I'm very proud of and excited that they are doing that. I want to help them approach it the right way, because I don't want them to be quiet, because we need them. The worst thing for them to do would be to be quiet, and
Yeah.
especially at a time
or do one repost, the week something happens,
right,
and then go silent again and back to business as usual. So you got a lot of white leaders listening. Do you want to talk?
Yeah,
man.
I posted, and this is going to be a little strong, but I think it'll be helpful. I posted something recently that said, a message to my white leader friends: now is not the time to be prideful concerning racism. I believe that God is cleaning house from a prophetic lens, and you don't want to get caught in the crossfire. And so what I simply meant by that is, I think God is pruning our world right now.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many leaders I sit on the phone with, white leaders specifically, helping them navigate. From Africa to South America to Australia to America to Canada. White leaders everywhere going, the Aboriginals were rioting in Australia. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And
in
indigenous
London.
people in Canada, and blacks in Canada, and brown people in Canada. Yeah, for sure.
And so my thing with all of them is, hey, God, it's obvious that God is doing something with this. Otherwise, it would not be as big. I think if you have a spiritual antenna at all, then you can kind of sense that God is working on this right now. And so what you want to do is, you want to be as humble as possible in this, as God himself, I believe, is pruning a lot of these areas to make the world what it should be. And so, which is equality for all, which is dignity, which is love, which is all of this. Unfortunately, sometimes when God moves, he moves a little bit aggressive, which
that would be consistent with scripture. Yeah.
Right. From the Old Testament to some of the New Testament, okay. And so he is moving a little bit. And so my thing with, to my white leader friends, I always tell them, if you're as humble as you can be in this, you'll be fine, because God loves humble people. It's the prideful that we have seen him knock down with a vengeance.
What is the difference between someone who's being prideful?
Yeah.
And I don't mean that to be a trivial question, but how would I be proud about my position, and how would I show humility? What's the difference?
I think one of the ways to be prideful is just having an approach that is angry. That I'm angry about what happened, and I'm angry, and you respond out of that anger in a way that is, I'm justified in my anger, which ignores the concept. When people talk about, and please hear me in the spirit when I say white privilege, because white people hate the term. Just hear me when I say that. What they're talking about, I renamed it white advantage, because it's easier for white people to understand. While I still agree with the term white privilege, I renamed it white advantage so that they could understand what I was saying. It means because of the color of your skin, you've had an advantage in life because of the history of our country, so on and so forth.
So I buy that. Tell me tell me in your mind what white privilege is or white advantage is.
Yeah. And this is what it kind of shows up as now. Because I think one of the reasons why it's so difficult to understand is because it was very apparent and very blatant in the 60s and in the 70s. You could just see it. We literally couldn't go in the same restaurant. We literally couldn't drink out of the same water fountain. We literally couldn't get the same loans. We could not go in the banks. You know what I'm saying? It was just, it was so apparent.
You're not supposed to buy a house in this neighborhood, period.
Right. Like it was just like, no, you're Black. And that's a policy that we have in this neighborhood that Black people cannot stay here. And so get out of here. So that's white privilege. You know what I'm saying? Like at the highest level, white advantage, if you will. I think what it shows up as now are systems that have been put in place. I'm going to get kind of deep. Families that have been in power for such a long time, that has matriculated into 2020, and we are living in the results of those systems set up in the 1930s and 40s and 50s and 60s. We're living in the result of what those systems set up to be, for America to be. And so what it looks like now is, well, 80% of the CEOs of the largest companies in our world are white, or let's just go America, are white. 20%, even maybe lower, 15% are minority. You start to go, okay, now, how did that happen? Right? And so then and then what it looks like is, okay, well, we got to hire for this company. Well, how do people hire? They hire out of their immediate circle. And so if your immediate circle is white, which for all of us, I think we would all agree, most of us live, and there are outliers that have multicultural lives and so on and so forth. But most of us tend to live in a homogenous world where we hang around our people, right? Like I grew up all Black. I hung around all Black people. Most white people hang around a lot of white people. It's not that you are a bad person. That's just where you grew up. It's kind of that. And so when you hire out of your friend circle, what does that look like? Well, if you're a CEO of a Fortune 500 company and you hire out of your immediate friend circle, everyone at the top is white. And then everyone below them is white. And then everyone below them is white. And so that's an example of white privilege. And what it is, it's the result of a system. So how do you break it? You have to break the system. You have to shock the system, because it's the system that we're living in now that is now starting to work against us. And so I could go on and give example after example after example, but if I were to sum it up, I would say that there are systems that were put in place a long time ago that is obvious for us, if we know the history of this country, to favor white people that are still living today, that no one has changed. So now we need to change it. And I would say this, good, well-meaning white people have not changed it, not because they didn't want to, they just didn't know.
Right.
And so now that it's a system of, hey, people of color need you. There's some discrimination happening. There's some there's, and we need you to shock the system a little bit so that everything that's white can be changed and be now more multicultural.
No, Sam, that's so helpful. And it's interesting. It's not what you know, it's who you know. That's an expression that's been around forever. When I was younger as a leader, I always thought that was about, maybe somebody here was the best candidate for the job, but we picked you because we kind of got you in, but you didn't really deserve the job. But then I realized, much later in life, that the way you describe it is actually way more accurate. That it's not what you know, it's who you know, is not about, I'm going to let you in even though you don't belong here. It's like, no, I went through my network and I just, I happen to know that this guy, Jake is awesome because I know his dad and I know he's very capable. And so I'm going to hire Jake before I hire a stranger I don't know, regardless of the color of their skin. But what happens is when 80% of the CEOs are white, you end up hiring 80% white people, right? Just because, I may know Sam, but I don't really know Sam. So why would I hire you when I know this guy and I know he's got a good kid? And so it ends up being kind of unintentional. Is that what you're saying?
100%. And what it results in is discrimination. That's what it results in. So then you, as a Black person, you go, how come all the Google executives are this? I don't think Google is that way. I don't know Google.
No, I don't
But I'm
either.
just saying, how come all of these massive companies that are making all these decisions, how come they're led by all white people?
Right.
And how come they're making all these decisions? And then when you start to look at the products, what happens is it all trickles down. And so when you have certain people, and I'm going to get a little bit more deep, when you have certain people in certain environments that live a certain way, that are a certain color, they also think a certain way. So now when they encounter somebody that doesn't think like them, it's wrong per se, but it's because they don't understand it. And then it becomes, well, we're not going to do that idea. We're going to favor this idea because it's something I understand. Can I translate? Because it's something white and I'm white, so I get it. And so I'm going to say no to this black idea. I'm going to say no to this black loan. I'm going to say no to this black community. I'm going to say no to this black student. I'm going to say no to that because I don't understand it. And I'm going to favor what I understand. But it's all a result of just, all that.
Well, and I get it now. Like one of the things I've been trying to do is to learn a lot over the last little while. And you've helped with that, as have some others. And because, you think, oh, if it's discrimination, it has to be, well, I don't like black people, or I don't like brown people, or I don't like people who don't look like me, right? But that's not it at all. It's much more subtle than that sometimes. There are definitely people like that. It's like, I'm never hiring someone who looks different than me. Okay, there's definitely people like that. But you're saying it's more complex. And I think you're right, because you're saying, no, it's just, I don't know. We're looking for a communicator, and your style just doesn't really fit our style or our congregation. It's not about the color of your skin. Is that fair?
Oh, Carey.
Is that fair?
Can I just stop? Can I just stop you right there? Hold on. You're hitting it. You are breaking this down. Keep going.
I'm just trying to learn, and I'm trying to see it. And I think I see it a lot more clearly, because before 2020, if people, the term white privilege has been around for a long time, also used by white people on white people. And there was a part of me, I never said this publicly, would be like, I can't help that I was born with this color of skin, that I come from Northern European descent. Like, that's not my fault. And yeah, I hustled hard, and there's lots of people who didn't. But I'm seeing it in a whole new way. And you've been so helpful with that. So now I want to get to, okay, so I am in a place where, with some exceptions, a lot of my friends are white, and what do I do about that? How do I fix the system? Wow. So I'm not the president of the United States. I'm not, I have a little tiny sphere of influence. So what do I do with my little sphere of influence, Sam, to help make change?
Let me first of all say this. For every white leader that's listening and that is out there, the fact that you would even be open, and the fact that you're leaning in, and the fact that you're passionate about making a change is amazing. And I want to encourage you in that, because we need it. Yeah. I want you to hear a person of color say, thank you for helping to right the wrongs of history. Thank you for leaning in. Thank you. Please don't stop leaning forward. And even though some of this stuff is hard to understand and hard to accept, right? And even though some of it you may take personally, I appreciate you sticking down in the journey, on the journey with us, because this is on the heart of God. And more importantly, you're helping image bearers that need it the most. Yeah. And I want to say that. Okay. I got emotional. I just felt the Lord.
That's awesome.
So I think when we talk about solutions, how do we break the system? I'm going to tell you, Carey. Yeah. After doing this work for the last 6 years in predominantly white spaces and multicultural spaces, and even in black spaces, but more so predominantly white, I would say the only way, and there may be others, but I believe the largest way, the only way to really fix the system is you have to break it. If I were to say a different way, you have to completely shock it.
What does that mean?
What it means is, I was working with an organization, and I know we keep talking about staffing, but a lot of these are leaders. But this flows into content. This flows into marketing. This flows, and if you're a banker, this flows into like money and giving. This flows into colleges. This flows into admission. I mean, this concept hits everything. what it means is this. I was consulting an organization, Carey, and they hired 8 new staff members after 4 years of doing racial diversity work and wanting to diversify and wanting to shock this, fix the system of white advantage, white privilege, whatever you call it. And after 4 years, Carey, they stood up 8 staff members and all of them were white.
Wow.
So I'm in the room going, man, they're quote unquote woke now. They should know, right? I'm like, man, they're gonna be sad, right? So I'm thinking I need to go and pat everybody on the back and go, it's okay, we're gonna get there. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I went around and nobody saw it, Carey.
Nobody saw it.
Nobody even saw it. They stood 8 new staff members up one by one. And nobody noticed that they were all white, but me. And so I started going, first of all, I asked the question, how did this happen? So I'm like, why didn't you see it? So then I went on an intellectual journey. I started reading Harvard books. I started looking at, entrepreneur.com, magazines, articles from some really smart professors on why white people can't see white things.
That's a great title.
And I discovered there's actually an academic term for it. It's called white normativity. And white normativity is a concept that simply means if you've grown up white, if all you've seen is white, white is normal. So you don't
like
see
that.
it as
That metaphor where, it's like a cartoon, there's fish swimming in the water and someone says, how's the water today? And they're like, water? What's water?
right.
I don't even see it. What?
100. They're like, oh, so for them, it was normal, Carey. So so a large part of that is pointing out the fact that, hey, when you see something that's all white, it doesn't mean it's all right. So you have to now condition your mind to see something different. So that was one. But 2, and this is talking about shocking the system. I had a conversation with the CEO. CEO was devastated.
Because he didn't see it or she didn't see it.
I don't even think he saw it for real, he or she, and devastated. And then he said, we have to change this. Like, we got to do something drastic, because if we don't, like, there's no way. And it was each department. And by the way, how they all get hired is they went through their phone and they hired their friends or the friend of their friends.
And that kind of is how it works a lot. Yeah.
That's how it works. And so, and they were in positions of power. So we're repeating the narrative. Okay. And so, so here's what they did, Carey. They said, and people are going to hate this. They're going to hate what I'm getting ready to say. But I want you to think about the alternative.
Yeah.
I want you to think about the alternative of what I'm getting ready to say. So in other words, what else would you do? So they said the next 10 hires cannot be a white person.
Wow. Just can't
be. And
they
said it can't be. They said we're talking about an organization of 200 employees, 300 employees.
Right.
And all.
So it's not like you have 5 employees and the next 10 can't be white. It's like,
no, we're talking about we can't break this cycle. And it's 300 of us in here and we have to diversify.
Right.
And we have to give people of color a chance. And we have to break the system of white advantage. And so they said the next 10 hires have to be people of color. And here's what they said, Carey. And they obviously couldn't put this on the document because it could probably get legal and, get crazy.
Yeah, reverse discrimination, whatever the charge might be. Yeah.
But privately they said, and I'm sharing this publicly so that people would know, they said, whatever you have to do to get a person of color that is competent, educated, and knows how to do this, I need you to do. And whether that takes us a year or 2 or even 6 months, he got so passionate about it, Carey. He said, I will not let this organization continue in this direction.
And that's an example of breaking the system.
Yep. And you know what happened, Carey?
No.
They found him.
I think it was Katie Cole who was on this podcast a couple of years ago. We were talking about gender in church because, you get in the rooms that you and I are in, it's a lot of white males, let's be honest, in evangelical world. And people, or maybe it was Danielle Strickland, I can't remember, but it's like,
Either, right?
We can't find any female preachers. And the line was, maybe you better look harder. and you know, I'm like, yep, you're right. We just have to look harder. And
because when we are challenged, we rise to the challenge, Carey.
Well,
people go ahead. No, go ahead, Carey. Go
and I mean, you just, I think you absolutely nailed it. It's the Rolodex system. It's like, who do I know? And so let's give a lot of white leaders the benefit of the doubt. We do not all deserve the benefit of the doubt, but you know, there are people who are not saying I'm not racist because they're just trying to say they're not racist, but they would be like, Sam, I'd hire you in a heartbeat. But the problem is they don't know you and they don't know people who look like you. And as a result, they talk to their cousin whose kid is looking for a job, who's an awesome kid who happens to be white. And they're like, man, I'd hire him in a heartbeat. And so we perpetuate the system. Yeah.
Yes. And that's how you become a part of perpetuating the problem, even though you're a great person. I think the same is true for us. Like, I think Black normativity is real too, in terms of like, when I first started trying to diversify, and I have to help Black churches with this when I'm talking to them that want to be more diverse, because they do. I'm going, hey, can't be an all Black ad.
Right.
You got to switch it up a bit. Obviously, it leans a little bit more heavy towards the white side. So I think that's one concept. I think the second concept, Carey, is for a long time in America, white people moved away from Black people.
Yep.
They call it white flight.
I know that term. Yeah.
And really, can we just be honest? It was a result of racism. I mean, that's what it was.
100%.
It was, and you can call it whatever. You can call it prejudice. You can call it, we wanted to, keep our neighborhoods safe. We wanted to be a certain way. I get it. But at the end of the day, that started with racism. And I would probably venture to say that you probably live in an all-white neighborhood, and if you trace it back to when it probably first began, it probably has been white for a long time.
Oh, it's been white for 200 years. I mean, that's just the Canadian settlement patterns, and it's this. I live in the country, so it's the cities that have become more diverse with immigration, and that's starting to change here, which I think is super encouraging. Like, we've lived here for 25 years. Yeah, I think it was like 1 or 2% diverse when we moved here. Now it's probably closer to 10%, which I think is awesome. But it's one of those things where it wasn't white flight or anything like that. These are just historic patterns and, European immigrants in an area for many, many years, and not a lot of new immigration settling in these patterns, although that's beginning to change.
Wow.
Keep going. I had a question and it slipped my mind. So.
No, I think, I think to that, I do think it's worth asking the question, how do we change that? How do we diversify it? How do we, even make people of color more comfortable with moving out there? Even asking the question, what would happen if people of color moved there? Would people feel some type of way?
Right.
Or would it be normal? So it just, I think where we are in our world is making us rethink everything. And
I think that would speak to, I had a conversation with Levi Lusko, who's in Montana, and he's like, yeah, it's not particularly diverse here either. And you got a lot of people living in middle America listening to this. We heard this about coronavirus all the time, right? Hey, I'm not New York, I'm not California, like it's not an issue here. And I think that's very easy to do, is to say, I don't live in New York City, so it's not an issue here. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I love what Tim Keller says, and I've heard him say that when you're talking about white flight and what happens, he says, this happens in cities too, right? Like when cities begin to change, what happens is churches move to the suburbs. You've seen that, right? Where churches move to the suburbs. He goes, if you look at the gospel is actually the only example, I think he was preaching through Jonah, where the city gets wicked, and I'm not saying diversity is wicked, that's not at all, but the city starts to, become a place where people are leaving, but the church moves in, the prophet moves in, the church moves in. And I think that should be the solution for the gospel, is like when everybody, if other people are running, we move in. If it seems to be too difficult for some people or too tense for some people, that's where the gospel moves in. And so the thrust of the gospel is toward the challenge, not away from the challenge. Do you want to, any comments on that? And I want to talk to you about how you got beat up on social media. And then we got to one of my questions today. So thank you, Sam. This was another productive interview. And I love it whenever we get together. But talk to anything you would say about running toward the challenge rather than away from it. That's what I was trying to say with Killer.
Yeah. I mean, I think, Jesus is always caught running towards the mess.
Yeah.
The people that nobody wants to be around, he's running towards them, right? The people that are making all types of mistakes, he's going after them. The tension in the room, I think Jesus is a great example for us. And even the story of the Good Samaritan, which is an amazing story when he's asked the question, well, who is my neighbor? I think that is a story about racism and going across, putting down our political affiliations and ideologies and our cultural, histories and coming across the line to love our brother. I think that Jesus is always running towards the mess. And I think as believers, we have to run towards anything that's separating us. Whatever is separating us. And as we move into an election cycle in this country, in terms of America, we have to run towards each other. We have to not let our political ideologies divide us. We have to, and I think this is going to be a critical election as we look at what the next 8 years of our world can be. I think the choice is so important. And I think it would behoove all of us to spend time with each other. Because I think if we'll spend time, it'll give great context.
And it occurred to me too, because I've done a series of interviews. I think these will air on this podcast, but I remember doing one and just thinking, coronavirus is going to pass, as devastating as it is. Coronavirus is going to pass. Yeah. But when you look at racial reconciliation, I think actually this is the issue that will define this generation. That 50 years from now, looking back on it, coronavirus will be like, yeah, there was a pandemic, but it's like, look at what happened. It'll be like the mid-1960s in America. It has a potential to be that. Sam, to wrap up, and this has been so rich and so good. Talk to us about why you got beat up on social media. And, I think there's a certain level of leaders are tired, leaders are exhausted, nerves are frayed. This is a difficult issue on top of a difficult issue that we were already navigating. You got hammered on social media from every side, including by some of your brothers and sisters in the African-American community. Talk about what that was, where the opposition came from, how you dealt with it, and then encourage leaders who might be afraid to say more because they're just tired.
Yeah, I think what I would say, Carey, is, it was so difficult for me in the beginning because I was pursuing an MLK route, a Martin Luther King Jr. route. When I looked at how he created social change, which I think everyone would agree that he was the greatest leader of one of the greatest at least, if not the greatest leader of social change in our world today. There's not a continent that you can go to that does not know Martin Luther King Jr. Because of what he did in this country. And so as I'm following his lead, right, one of the things that he did really well was stand in the middle. He stood in the middle of both worlds while speaking truth to power and seeking to create change that would eventually turn into reconciliation. And so as I tried to stand right in the middle of this, some would say the second pandemic that we're going through right now, which is the racial tensions in our world, I got hit from both sides, man. And there were some Black people that felt like I wasn't militant enough. There were some white people that felt like I was talking about it too much. And then there were people in the middle that were just confused and trying to figure it all out. And so for me, Carey, I had a come to Jesus, if you will, moment with myself and with Jesus. And I realized there's no place in this fight that I can stand and not get shot.
Yeah.
Unless I don't fight at all. And I knew that wasn't an option. But I'll be honest, for a moment, I gave up. I said, I can't win. And it was Jesus, and it was God, and it was MLK that night, that I had the spiritual experience. And for me, as I watched MLK, what I realized through his interviews about rioting, through his interviews about nonviolence, through his interviews about social change, through his interviews about speaking truth to power, I realized he always got hit on all sides. Always.
Yep.
There were Black leaders that criticized him publicly about him being too soft. There were white leaders that thought he was trying to move too fast and that he was saying too much and that
he was a communist.
He was a communist. He was right. Like, people say today, people think that they would love Dr. King today, but I think Dr. King would be screaming Black Lives Matter. I think he would be screaming it. I don't know that he would necessarily be endorsing all of the policies of the organization. And frankly, I didn't even know there was an organization most Black people didn't even know. And I think the hashtag itself is being hijacked politically by all of these policies. And here's what we need to do this, and we need to try this. And I separate the hashtag from the organization. Even though frankly, I don't know much about the organization, but the hashtag itself around the world just simply means the liberation of Black and brown people everywhere. Mm-hmm. I believe that he would be saying that today. I don't think people would like him as much as they like him now. And and they didn't like him back then. And
no,
so
he was very controversial.
Yeah, at one time he was the most hated man in America. I mean, it was like, but he changed our world. So I had to get the confidence to go, I'm going to pick where I stand, and I'm just going to take the bullets.
What would you say to white leaders who are, and I'm sure this has implication above that, but as a white man myself, who are like, Sam, that's good for you. You're African-American. You're right in the middle of it. But like, I got people who are going to leave my church. I got board members who are going to get mad. I got donors who might just disappear. I could lose influence over all of this. It's just easier for me to let someone else do something. And I don't want to say anything anymore.
What I would say to them is, I think maybe one of our biggest themes for this particular show, this episode, and it is, what is the price of influence? What's the real price of influence? Why does God give us influence? Is it so that we can protect ourselves? Or is it so that we can leverage everything we have to make a difference? And I would say this, Carey, I lost some followers, but I gained more than I lost. You're going to take a hit anytime you stand up for what's right. People hated Jesus.
Yeah,
they killed him.
Ultimately, it was his opponents who nailed him to the cross.
They killed him. My question is what are you willing to give up for this world to look better? Mm-hmm. And I would challenge you and say, again, what is the price of influence? And could this be a test from God to see where your heart truly lies?
Oh, that's good.
Does it lie with your image or with your big buildings or does it lie with the cross?
Or the kingdom.
And that's where I had coming. To land. What'd you say?
Or the kingdom coming.
Or the kingdom coming. And I'll say this as an encouragement. Whenever you stand up for the kingdom, you win.
I'm with you, Sam.
Right? You don't lose. Sir. God actually increases your platform. He grows your influence. You may lose something on the outside for a moment, but you stand up for the kingdom and God's going to back you every time. So,
yeah. And you did the right thing at the end of the day. Well, Sam, anything else you want to say in closing? This has been so helpful for me. I'm trying to learn. You're a great teacher. Thank you for helping me see things I didn't see, correct things that need correcting, and address things that need addressing. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, one, Carey, I love you, man.
It's mutual.
I feel like you're always on the right side of history. You're always doing what you need to do with your influence. Not that I'm the judge. You've invested in me more than many leaders. I'm just so grateful to know you. You're an incredible leader to follow, and you're worth following. And I think the last thing I would say is we've never been more postured for change in this country and in this world as it pertains to the issue of injustice and racism in the last 40 years than we are right now. Now is the time to make the move. Put all your cards on the table. Stand up for what's right and see God do the miraculous. That's what I'd say. And it would really help me if you bought this book.
A greater story. Actually, just that section you talked about growing up Black in America, I'm really looking forward to digging into that more because I think it's really important for those of us who didn't grow up in that context to understand more, to learn, to listen, all of that. Sam, this isn't the last conversation by any stretch, but it's been a great one. Thank you, my friend. And if people want to follow you online, Sam Collier on Instagram. And what website? I mean, obviously Amazon, everywhere books are sold. But if people want to check out all things Sam, where do they find it?
Yeah, just go to agreaterstory.org. Go to agreaterstory.org and you'll find everything. Carey, awesome. You're the man.
You're the man, Sam. Thank you.
All right. Talk.
Well, I hope today's episode was helpful to you. You can always get more by subscribing to my channel. I also have a lot more content over at CareyNieuwhof.com for leaders in business and leaders in churches. And you can get transcripts of this episode there and so much more, plus some other stuff I do for leaders. So head on over there to discover more at CareyNieuwhof.com. And in the meantime, I really hope our time together today has helped you lead like never before.